And we are live. Good evening, everyone. It is our live chat for Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. Thank you, everyone who has joined. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit quieter tonight, mostly because we don't have any winter storms on the way, but that's typical for the warm season, and we are moving into the warm season here. Now, a couple of things I want to touch on. First, with everything going on with the war, um, it's a horrible situation, and my hope is that everything gets resolved and Russia leaves and Ukraine goes back to where it should be, which is an independent nation. But it's just horrible seeing these things. So my thoughts go out to them, and hopefully, things go back to the way they were. It's horrible, you know. Of course, there are a couple of topics I want to touch on. Typically, as we get into the warm season, sometimes you're not going to have a lot of questions, and I'm going to have some limited stuff to go over. So the discussions may not last an hour. Of course, during the winter, it can last 2 hours. So always varies. So we'll see how it goes for tonight's chat. But one of the things I definitely want to talk about, along with the threat for some wintry precipitation for early next week, and also the evolving weather pattern that we're keeping an eye on. We'll talk about that. But I also wanted to talk about the latest data that came out on climate change. Now, you saw probably a brief story or two about climate change. Obviously, what's going on internationally everywhere else is pretty much overshadow it. But typically, as always, the media tend to focus on basically the worst case possible scenario. So I want to explain to you where that's coming from, how that happens, and so that way you can understand what's being discussed. Okay, this isn't, look, the media, I'm going to be very careful here. The media is a business. Okay, so networks like CNN or NBC or ABC, whatever, they want you to watch. So they want to capture your attention. So if they say, hey, climate change, things are getting better, what we're doing is starting to get better, you're not going to watch. You are going to watch when it says, oh my God, the world's ending. That's what happens. That's the nature of 24/7 news channels. So how far off are they? Well, let's take a look at the data here, okay? Now, where you're getting all this information about, the supposed end of the world, basically, and everything going straight to hell in a handbasket, is basically 8.5 here, which is this feature right here, okay, where you end up 3 to 4 to even 5 degrees Celsius above the normal of where we were before we started to get into the industrial age. In this scenario, which is very unlikely, but in this scenario, the way you get to this scenario is basically we go back to coal and oil, and only coal and oil, and we ramp it up, and basically you end up with coal plants in your backyard, okay? Basically, if we do nothing and then make it worse, you end up with 8.5. Now, is that possible? Well, the way that technology is going, I would say no. But if you go with the idea that that you could do whatever you want, and that putting in CO2 in the atmosphere has no influence, then you would end up in that respect. Now, understand, when you talk about introducing CO2, if you have doubts about this, I'll make this very simple for you. It's a very simple physics equation. Whatever force you put into a system, you get a result out of that system. Okay? So if you introduce a higher amount of gas, whether that's methane or CO2, you will get warming. Okay? That's a basic, very, very basic equation. Okay? Now, there are far more complicated features in that. And let's face it, to say we should just stop using oil, it's nice to say, It's not exactly easy to do. I mean, same people that do that tend to also typically have a lot of products and whatnot that they don't realize have to get transported around the world, which is going to be hard to do without oil and natural gas unless you go nuclear. Now, the other extreme that you'll probably hear on other news sources is basically 1.9. Okay, now this is a scenario where we have no influence on the atmosphere, which obviously isn't happening either. And in that scenario, well, the models would suggest that, hey, just keep on doing what you're doing. It's not realistic. What's realistic is either 2.6, 4.5, or 7.0. Okay, so 2.6, which is this one, would be the situation where we kind of level out around 1.7 degrees above normal, and then we start to decrease again as we head towards 2100. Now, this scenario is where we go, basically, we start using a lot more solar, a lot more nuclear, which we'll talk about also with fusion energy. This scenario right here is where we're still using some oil and gas, but we're also going towards solar and wind power and using a multiple of different energy sources. This is a scenario that right now is the most likely. In this scenario, your life expectancy still increases. The quality of life is still increasing. In fact, in all these scenarios, life expectancy and quality of life does not significantly change for much of humanity, but it still has a significant impact on the Earth. Okay, you can read that in this study right here, which you can find under report.ipcc.ch, or you could just Google it, okay, and take a look at that. And then in scenario 7.0, this is where we're very slow in implementing solar and wind, and we're still using a lot of oil, and we don't transition to electrical vehicles, which again, that's not a complete panacea. I know a lot of people like say, I got a electrical vehicle. Yeah, but all the stuff you use, like the lithium battery, which by the way is in Europe, a lot of the lithium happens to be in where we're having our war. Wonder why that invasion's happening? Because they have the largest amount of lithium in basically Europe and Asia combined. So yeah, just think about that. That's where your batteries are coming from. And you have to mine that. So it's not exactly completely green either. But in this scenario is where we go with a lot of, still a lot of oil and natural gas, where we're slower with that transition. Still warm. You're still ending up with losing a lot of ice in the Arctic. And you're still having an influence on the global temperatures, but it's not as bad as the worst case scenario, which is very much unlikely. So your two extremes, which you're going to hear in the media, which is 8.5 and 1.9, depending on where you get your news source from, is either your worst case or best case scenario, which both of these are very unlikely. You're more likely to be in this range here, and then how our technology develops will tell us exactly what to expect. Now, when I take a look at the latest temperatures, this is from the UAH satellite-based temperatures of the global lower atmosphere. What you want to do, you want to take this data, combine that with the surface temperatures, because the surface temperatures, they also have some error issues. Okay, some of them are near airports. Sometimes you have some urban heat island effect issues. Sometimes there's some problems with the data. So you never go with this completely by itself, but you combine the factors, okay? So that's certainly something that you could definitely do here. And you can see where our trend is overall is certainly increasing, but it's not to the point where you're skyrocketing out of control. So that is certainly some interesting data that I usually go check out from Dr. Roy Spencer. Again, you never take any of this data and just stand for it alone, but you kind of combine everything. You kind of get a complete picture. So what this does is that it gives me a better idea of what's going on in the atmosphere outside of the urban heat island effect, and then you introduce the urban heat island effect, which I think the way by doing it that way, you get a better idea to understand what's happening with storm structures, convective weather, and the intensity of storms. Because this feature here, being above normal as it is, this explains the ability for the atmosphere to hold more moisture, which we talked about the precipitable water values. Then you get your intense storms, like your intense mesoscale banding, which is driven more by your urban heat island effect, which is a small scale feature, right? So your small scale features and your large scale features, you combine them because the atmosphere is never a linear feature. It's always basically 4D chess, okay? When you combine all these factors together, okay, then you get a really good idea of what's actually happening in the atmosphere and the influences that we have and the influences that we don't have, which I'm going to go over. I'll give you a couple of examples of some natural features that some people consider to be climate change, but really are not climate change as part of the climate. So I wanted to throw in some good news here. And some good news here is we continue to see major breakthroughs in nuclear fusion. Now, as you know, and some of you might be new, you might not know about this too much, but I am a big proponent of nuclear fusion. Nuclear in general, I think we should have gone to back in the 90s and 80s because I think we would have had less of an issue with everything that we have now, especially when it comes to energy dependency and dependency on foreign sources of energy. And then you could still make a case to back off on oil and gas. But fusion energy, in my opinion, is going to be have the same impact on our economy and the way that we live day to day as the iPhone was. Okay? It's going to fundamentally change everything. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that we have gotten to the point where now we are able to create basically a mini sun. And each one of these experiments, each group is taking the advancement that they've gotten and kind of piggyback on the next one and then piggyback on the next one. So you're seeing a closer and closer ability to get to a feasible, controllable, commercialized fusion energy solution. So basically what these guys did in England, in UK-based Jet Laboratory, and this just came out a couple of weeks ago, is that they were able to sustain a small sun that was able for just a couple of seconds to basically boil 60 kettles worth of water, which, again, it doesn't sound like a lot, but again, the advancement from where we were just two years ago to, hey, maybe we might be able to control this, to now we're able to control it for a set number, for a set time, and we're able to actually translate that to an energy output where we're actually getting more energy out than when the energy that we put in now is a huge, huge development. And if you want to read more about it, definitely go to the UK Atomic Energy Authority. They have more information on this. But understand what we just saw here is the equivalent of maybe the first working iPhone. And you've seen how fast technology has improved in electronics and now in energy. This could be a major breakthrough. And it could fundamentally change the way that things can work in our energy sector. Are we there yet? No, but every week now I'm hearing about a new advancement week after week. And if we get to that point, I think it fundamentally changes a lot of this discussion, and we're more likely to be down in this zone here. Okay, in fact, you can even introduce 1.9 here as a possible result, then not. So I wanted to I don't want to make it all like doomsday, gloom, and whatnot. So if you want to read the whole, it's about 3,676 pages Okay, so I've been reading it for a couple of days now. So yeah, it's a bit long. But if you dive into the actual data and not just rely on the news sources, which again, they got their own thing. They understand that they're paid to get you to draw to get your attention, right? They're not going to sit there and read 3,676 pages worth of information to you. Okay, that's your job, and you can do it now because you have the internet. So it's a long read, but hey, if you want to actually learn what's actually going on and have a better idea, then definitely skim it. You could jump to different chapters and read everything. So I would definitely suggest you do that because I think it's a great thing. And again, just you could just go to IPCC on the on Google. It'll pop right up right on the top page. So it won't be any problem there in finding that information. And I'm going to take all your questions about that. It looks like you got a couple already in the premium chat and the YouTube chat. Looks like there's influence there. Oh, good. And there's a natural variation one. Good. I'm going to let me touch on that in a second. A feature that's natural that I want you to be aware of is this drought going on in the western United States. That is actually a normal climate feature over western North America, and it's directly connected to a prolonged negative PDO phase, which we could see. Let's see here, right here. Let me zoom in on this. So we've had cold water here for quite some time now. Okay, now climatological studies have shown that when we get this cold water sustained here, we end up with a pretty sustained drought over the western United States. And this isn't the first time, and it won't be the last time that we've seen this. Now, some say that what's going on to climate may be enhancing this, and I could definitely see that point in terms of above normal 500 millibar heights, especially if you have a cold stratospheric environment. But what I'm trying to say is that this feature is a natural feature, and it's not going away anytime soon. The last time this happened, it lasted 100 years. So it is what it is. Meanwhile, let me get back to the weather that is going on right now. We do have a low pressure system on the way with some rain and snow showers approaching. Not really seeing much in support of much in the way of snow showers or anything accumulating wise, but certainly chilly conditions out there. As our polar jet stream remains very active, we continue to see one shortwave after the other rotating around the polar jet stream with a nice polar vortex here. Subtropical jet stream is down here, remaining weak, which is pretty much an influence from La Nina. So that's certainly a feature that we continue to keep an eye on. Not much in the way of warm or cold air transport here. Not much at all. Very, very weak. So these are very weak shortwaves that are marching their way through. So the next feature that we're really keeping an eye on, this weekend we have a few pesky showers to worry about, but I'm keeping an eye for the northern interior for Monday night into Tuesday morning. Let me refresh this real fast and get this news data in here just to make sure it's all updated. And really the lifting parameters for this event for Tuesday really comes in at the frontogenesis here. We have a very weak shortwave coming through, and we don't see a great deal of lifting, but just enough, strong enough cold air transport is going to be coming in on Tuesday that could make it a little bit interesting for the higher elevations. Again, for March, if you're looking for frozen precipitation, you're going to have to go towards the Poconos and Catskills, Green and White Mountains, locations like that, maybe the central Hudson River Valley. I see that this month featuring a lot of cold rain in this weather pattern. And a lot of that is driven on by not only the La Nina that is going to be lingering around, but also the evolution of our polar vortex. Now, we're going to be in for a cold snap, kind of. It's going to be modified quite a bit by the March sun that's going to be taking hold. But that's all driven by this split here that is happening over the next 90 hours. And you can see that also showing up pretty nicely here at 50 millibars as well. And what this will do is that it will allow some polar air to pull around basically southeastern Canada. Notice I'm saying southeastern Canada, not eastern United States. We'll get a glancing blow of this, but again, this is a transient situation. So we continue to see a cold shot, quick moderation, another cold shot, quick moderation. And that's essentially what we're seeing here until we get to about 13 days out. Now, at 10 days out at 500 millibars, at 50 millibars, we still have this stretching. But you could tell what's going to happen next at 50 millibars by what's happening at 10 millibars, which shows a consolidated polar vortex nowhere near North America. This is where we're going to be heading at 50 millibars, and then at 100 millibars, and then at 500 millibars as we move forward through March. So what this tells me is that, and let me pull up the European ensembles here, is that for the first half of March, we continue to feature this roller coaster of temperatures and very volatile temperature regime. And while I don't expect much in the way of winter storms, because this pattern just has no high latitude blocking, the ridge is off the west coast here, nowhere near the Rockies. This is a progressive pattern with waves of cold fronts marching through, no real major winter storm type scenarios. But what this essentially is a pattern that gives you a quick shot of cold air and then it leaves. So after about March 15th, what you'll see is this upper level low start to lift north towards Greenland and start to kind of basically start to mirror the polar vortex you're seeing at 10 millibars before it completely weakens and contracts. So I'm thinking that the second half of this month of March is definitely going to feature well above normal temperatures. But watch out for your heavy rainfall events as you get these troughs that start to really lock in over portions of the Rockies and the plains here, with significant severe weather breaking out in the plains and the mid-Mississippi River Valley. And those storms approach us with some pretty significant heavy rainfall events for the second half of March. So definitely watch out for that. We'll be seeing if that comes in with the data, but the reason why I'm thinking that's going to be evolving is based on what I'm seeing here with the MJO. I'm thinking that we're going to be moving into a phase 7 and 8, which by the time we get to late March is a cool pattern, but also a wet one. So you combine the MJO influences with what's going on with the stratosphere, and that's pretty much how I'm getting my thinking. I don't think we're going to be well above normal, but we'll be above normal with a lot of rain, and a lot of those above normal temperatures are going to be driven by the warm, low temperatures because of all the moisture in the atmosphere. So that's my thinking on that pattern overall, and the evolution of our weather pattern through this weekend, which will feature pesky showers, and then our wintry mix for the northern interior that we'll be keeping an eye on. So that's pretty much all my thoughts. Let me jump back here and let me take your questions. And we'll see, we have plenty of questions in the premium chat, and we also have pretty good questions here on the YouTube chat. So I'm definitely going to be going over all this stuff right now. So let's see here. Let me scroll back up. And of course, good evening, everyone. Let's see here. Okay, so Card has a couple of questions, so let me answer each one of them. I will note that given the IPCC is run by the UN, I am skeptical of this stuff, the way they put stuff out, given the politicians do the summaries. That's why I suggest reading the actual report, because when you read the actual report, you get a better idea of what the actual science is saying. Definitely, there isn't a scientist out there that says we have no impact. There isn't. And because the reason why is because it's a basic physics law. Okay, whatever impact, whatever influence you put into a system, you're going to have a result out. It's completely impossible for you not to. The question is how much of an impact, what is that sensitivity in the system, and then you work that out. And then there's all sorts of natural factors you have to take into consideration: volcanoes, solar impacts, so on and so forth, and a lot of factors in the stratosphere that we don't understand, that we're getting a better idea on. But it's definitely some pretty strong research out there, so definitely check that out, read it for yourself, and get a good idea of what's actually happening. Saw the big volcanic eruption was found to have put material all the way up into the mesosphere. Yes, indeed, and it will have an impact. I definitely expect for this summer to maybe going into the fall, but definitely for the spring and for the summer, to have some cooling influences. What I'm going to be watching for is for an enhancement of a colder stratospheric environment, and that's going to lead to some pretty funky ridges and troughs developing in the mid-latitudes. How that evolves, I'm not sure yet. That's a huge wild card, but it definitely has gotten to the height where it can have an impact. Now it's a question of how does the QBO influence that transport and impact the nature of the 500 millibar pattern and the jet streams and whatnot. That's a huge wild card. I'm not sure yet. I tried to factor that into the forecast for the spring forecast, but I didn't want to really focus on it because we have so much limited data on it. Does the IPCC still have solar geothermal activity as constants? If so, is unrealistic. I believe the scenario 1.9 would consider that as being okay. I understand what you're saying. Solar is considered constant in terms of what they're putting into the model data. It's not perfect, but what they're measuring is the irradiance from the sun, and the difference in that is very, very small right now. What we're watching out for, and thus far we haven't seen, is support for a grand solar minimum. If that happened, then game on. But right now, I mean, here, let's pull up the data on solar activity. As you can see here, make sure our sun is very, very active. Okay, it finally kicked solar cycle 24. Definitely read about that at spaceweather.com. That's been why solar cycle 25 has really started to step up. So I'm not seeing a huge drop off in typical of the average that they're using in the model data. If I saw that, then I would say that then the model data needs to adjust. But the average they use has pretty much been steady, and it's something I definitely keep an eye on, and you can keep an eye on that data on spaceweather.com. So definitely check that out and definitely keep an eye on that. As far as geothermic activity, that's kind of like a wild card. Again, if you have a super volcano, it's kind of bigger problems than what car you're driving, because that's just a major global event. I mean, you might as well try to put in, impacts of a meteor. Okay, so they don't really dive into that a great deal, because the type of events that would have such a huge impact on the climate of that respect would be so devastating. It kind of doesn't really matter anymore, if you get a super volcanic eruption. Reality is almost always in the middle. Yep. So Snowboss says, yeah, but batteries and solar panels are actually not good for the environment. They have to be mined, and then when the batteries are done, you can't do anything with them. That is an excellent, excellent point. Now, in terms of batteries, there has been a lot of research in moving away from lithium, and going to something that is a little bit more degradable. They actually have started to look into a lot of amoebas and fungus as a way to generate a battery type feature, which is really, really out there, but it's actually being researched by Exxon, actually, of all people, because corporations aren't dumb. When they see that, hey, look, the writing's on the wall on whatever we're selling, they try to look for other things. So Exxon and Mobil is actually some of the companies that are leading the way in solar technology and battery technology, and looking at different ways to look at organic means to create batteries and to create new energy sources. So because they want to exist going beyond here. So not surprised by that. But you're absolutely right. As solar panels, they're getting better new technology and new material that is less toxic, but there's not as effective, so it's not used in a great deal. But you're absolutely right. It's something that the industry is trying to tackle. But solar panels are not like, Mr. Green and everything's great with them. There's a lot of factors along with mining that need to be considered, okay, which, again, kind of need diesel engines to do a lot of that mining. So there's that. Solar panels are highly toxic. Yes, they are, especially if you are sitting on them or eating on their surfaces. But I don't know why you would do that. But yeah, sure. So is your oil and your gas tank. That's toxic too. So is wiper fluid. So yes, they are toxic. A lot of things are toxic. Absolutely. Some of the materials are probably worse than nuclear waste because nuclear waste eventually loses radioactivity, while some of the materials in the panels stay toxic forever. It kind of depends on what factors you're talking about. The newer fission nuclear power plants, should I say, are actually getting better and better in reducing their toxic waste and actually being able to reuse a lot of the rods. So there's a lot of improvement in that. There's a lot, for whatever reason, a lot of fear with nuclear power. But if you actually read the research and read the advancements that we have, I don't see how you solve this problem without nuclear. I really, really don't. And the cautionary tale is what happened in Germany, where they decided to go away from coal and oil, and then they also shut down their nuclear power plants, and then they realized, gee, we don't have enough power with this solar and with wind and with geothermal. So they had to start importing from Russia. Okay? So it's a cautionary tale. So I think you need nuclear in order to have that bridge. Lithium batteries are really bad. Heck, even when you're using them, they can be harmful. It is possible, yes, absolutely. Let's see. Even seeing an electric car catch fire. Okay, card. Yes, I'm sure electrical cars, electrical trucks, electrical batteries, an electrical remote, phones. They can, and so can your gas-powered car. So, current Tier 4 final diesel engines run so clean now, the air coming out of the stack is actually cleaner than the air we breathe. Well, they've certainly made some improvements on that, and I've heard of that claim, but there are some who, let's see, the research is kind of mixed on that. Okay. Refusion, we need proof of concept before we can actually develop it. Oh, absolutely, Card. Absolutely. But that's what they're doing. You have to crawl before you run, right? So right now we're crawling, but we're crawling a heck of a lot faster than we were 30 years ago. And we're really on the move. I'd say right now we're walking. Very, very disorganized walking, bumping into furniture walking, but starting to walk. Fusion is also essential for any serious space exploration. Absolutely. The problem with enhanced claims is that there have been very lengthy droughts in those areas well before. Yes, absolutely. You have to separate between natural climate features and events and human influence events or human enhanced events. It's never... anyone that says, well, this is all because of X, Y, and Z alone and only alone, then they are not considering the full complexity of the atmosphere. So it's problematic when people go one extreme or the other. Is there still substantial heat transport at the stratospheric level to the polar regions? Well, we are still seeing a pretty good transport here. Let's first take a look at 10 millibars. You can see a lot of our warming that is taking place here and here. Okay. But notice over the last couple of images here, it's starting to back off. This is probably the most robust that we've seen this entire over the past 5 months. And it's supported by still some pretty good EP flux. And here's the observations. But notice we're starting to see a shift in that dynamic. Okay, notice the downward movement here. So this whole feature, this whole circulation is starting to come to an end, and the European model guidance is starting to catch on to that, where we're featuring weaker and weaker transport, and actually a negative transport as we move towards the middle of the month. So we're definitely seeing that transition and weakening, which is typically what we see this time of year. Let's see here. Exactly, Carl. We are a small blip in the climate as a whole. Okay. We can have a pretty significant impact, guys. It's because of CO2, and more importantly, because of methane. Methane has a far greater impact and far more than I'm concerned about. So, and again, this is part in snow. I know what you're talking about with. It's only the past 100 years that we even some records any of this. Yes, this is why I strongly do not believe in keeping in talking about this whole discussion in terms of record highs or record lows or anything of that nature, because it's too short of a record and there are too many errors within that record. But when you talk about something like 500 millibar heights and moisture transport and the ability to study the precipitated water values in the atmosphere, that's more concrete, and that can go back to basic equations to understand what's happening in the atmosphere. And that's how I explain climate change to other people. Is the MJO neutral a reflection of what's going on in the stratosphere? No, it's more of an influence on the La Nina putting up a fight and trying to hang on. Yeah, MJO is definitely not going to phase 3, 4, and 5 like we thought. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there's a stronger influence of La Nina in this weather pattern. In 2.5 weeks, the sun angle will be the same as in mid to late September. Not conducive for daytime wintry precipitation. Absolutely. Great point, Card. Worst case climate scenario is nuclear winter. Well, yeah, pretty much. Do you expect a lot of snow in the Rockies in this pattern? Not a lot. Well, okay, the highest elevations definitely have a good potential of seeing some pretty good snow. I'd watch out for California for a pretty significant rainfall event trying to slam into there if we get into phase 7. So watch out for that. Look at the SPC site. Real narrow distance between very cold air and very warm air between the surface and 850 millibars. I'm assuming you're looking at this. Yeah, it's a heck of a gradient. That is for sure. I agree with that. But there's not much in the way of transport. Let's see. And let's see if we have any more questions. Okay, so let me go and check out what's going on the YouTube side. Will there be any severe weather on Monday with the 996 low pressure system over us? I'm not expecting it. In fact, I think that that low pressure system on some of the operational guides is a little bit too strong. But definitely I like the idea of some heavier downpours, but I'm not looking at severe thunderstorms at this point right now, or any type of severe winter weather at all either. Let's see here. Pi Geek, I wanted to reach out on this one. That completely describes natural variation. Climate is a nonlinear, chaotic system. Looking at it only from a perspective standpoint of human activity alone is a terrible approach. I would agree. And if you read the data, in case I would strongly suggest reading the whole report. They don't do that. The climate models definitely do not do that in keeping a static, atmospheric, linear, chaotic, linear system. And they definitely include natural variation. A lot of the scientists who actually work on this, I'm not talking about like the people that go around with the propaganda, so to speak, but a lot of the core scientists, they are able to, if you have a chat with them, and just be polite, they are able to separate between what is a natural system and what is influenced by man. And when you separate those scientists tend to not go off on about, this storm is all created by man, and so on and so forth, because there is that natural variation. There is that AMO feature where it influences hurricanes. There is that urban heat island effect that influences mesoscale systems. And when you're able to separate that, then you have a better understanding of the atmosphere and a better understanding of how it influences the planet around us, okay? Remember, when people are talking about terraforming other planets, okay, when they're talking about doing that for Mars and stuff, the way you do that is to introduce a gas into the atmosphere. You introduce water vapor, you introduce CO2, and you introduce some methane, and you try to create a denser atmosphere. We're essentially doing that now. That's what we're doing. You know what I mean? So we have to understand what those influences are. But again, don't go over the top. Okay. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Are we done with snow? Depends where you are. If you're on the coastal plain, yeah, pretty much. If you're in the Poconos and Catskills, probably got another 2 weeks, so you should keep an eye out on things. Any more blizzards happen for mid-March? Not this year. I mean, can't rule it out years going beyond, but not this year. When is El Nino? Not anytime soon. That is for sure. At least not through this summer. There is no indication that is on the way. Maybe sometime next year. We'll see. Any chance of some 70s or 80s by the end of March in the southern mid-Atlantic around Baltimore and Philly? Yes. Well, definitely 70s. I'm not sure about 80s. At least not sustained, but definitely 70s. Problem with Mars is that gravity is not enough to hold the denser atmosphere because its core has cooled too much. Will eventually happen to Earth as well. That is true, but they've actually started to devise ways to get around that. It's interesting to see whether it'll work. I mean, it works in theory, but we'll see whether it actually works in reality. But trust me, they're going to try. So we'll definitely see how that works out, right? Or at the very least, what they might do is just create some domes and then create your own mesoscale atmospheric environment within like a glass dome, okay, which is something that they've actually been studying on in the desert Southwest. They've actually been running some experiments on that. I still think while studying of its increase, not enough is devoted to impact of urban heat islands and non-permeable surfaces. Actually, the atmospheric sciences in Georgia, that university, Georgia University, they've actually done an extensive amount of research on that, and it is groundbreaking in some respect. And I would say that it is something that I would suggest you reading, and I would definitely say Dr. Shepard is one of the lead doctors in studying urban heat island effect, and they have some amazing data on it. I strongly suggest reading it. Let's see here. And I think I got all the questions. Let's see. Okay, so it's 8:45. I'll give a couple more minutes and just see if you guys have any more questions, and then we'll shut it down for the night. Oh, got something in from YouTube. Let's check it out. The February UAH temperature graph is 0.0. What do you think of Dr. Roy Spencer? Oh, boy, it's a loaded question, but I shall answer it because that's what I'm here to do. So let me first pull up the data. Yes, well, baseball, I might blow my head off if I talk about baseball. Okay, so I think the data that he collects, which is satellite data, is very reliable, very realistic data. I agree with some of the things that Dr. Spencer says. For example, relying way too heavily on model data and treating it like as if it is 100% accurate. I think in the climate sciences, I see that way too much. It's a valid critique, and I think that it is something that we need to do a better job of explaining this to the public. I think he makes a valid point that sometimes that a lot of the claims are poorly supported, but I disagree with him on some aspects where he doesn't think that we have very little impact, and I became more convinced of our impact based on what we're seeing in the Arctic over the past 10 years. Okay, as I'm looking at the data and then matching it to what is actually happening and where our CO2 is, it makes more sense. Like you can kind of put the puzzle together and look at the data and look at the observations and make those comparisons and have an understanding of what's happening with high latitude blocking and whatnot. So there's that aspect. There are a lot. It's funny. I know a lot of scientists that are very much strongly about AGW warming, which is man-made warming, and those who are very much skeptical of it. And I consider myself to be in the middle. And I like to listen to both groups and take a little bit of column A, take a little bit of column B, kind of mix it together and kind of formulate my idea on how I see the atmosphere work. I think what's unfortunate is that politics has gotten in the way of this stuff, and it's sad that it has, because science is already contentious enough. You know, science is the nerdish version of Gladiator. Okay, because the idea is to take different ideas, put them up against each other, and fight it out, right? Debate it. And try to find out what is the truth. And that is constantly changing. So what I say is based on the data I see now. And my opinion can and will change as I gain more data. How important is your opinion in the... I don't even know what that network is. So, beats me. Let's see here. But I would definitely say that Dr. Roy Spencer is someone you should definitely read about and check out their website and read the data that he provides and then incorporate that to all the other data that you're seeing. And then ask questions. The amount of government funding the government pays for it, they want to call the tune. I know a lot of the scientists that actually work on this stuff, and trust me, they're not getting paid a lot of funds from the government, or at least a lot of money. They're not rolling in the dough, so to speak. All right, a lot of these guys live on tuna. So the
scientists don't make a lot of money. That's
the research that we're seeing is very sound. Okay, it's not been altered. There are some who I have a different opinion on. Like some of them who are from Penn State, one in particular. But I will say that a lot of the scientists who are working on this, they provide the actual raw data in a lot of their research now, and you can see how they come about their work. And this was coming out even during the Trump years when there wasn't much of any governmental support in it. As far as Major League Baseball, let me just put it this way. Look, owners, you can't go around celebrating about the fact you have like a $3.5 billion TV contract per year and then tell everybody that you're not making any money. It doesn't make any sense. Okay? If you just open your books and show, probably we wouldn't be having this lockout. But that's all I'm going to say about that. Do you think science backs religion? I don't know. I think science is the pursuit of truth, and religion is trying to find truth within yourself. And they can work together, but you have to have an open mind to everything. At least that's my philosophy. I don't know what happens after you die. I haven't been there. So, and the people that do know, they ain't coming back and they ain't telling you. So, I don't know what's. That's all I can say about that. Remember when the ex-Eagles owner Len Tuss opened up his books due to a lawsuit? I remember that. Even more so, the Atlanta Braves, because they're owned by a public company, had to release their books. And guess what they showed for last year? Record profit. So that's a mid-level team. I have my doubts. I think the owners have egg on their face. I think they really, really do. So I think that hopefully things work out for baseball, but I have my doubts. Let's see here. The Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. Oh, I'm sorry. This is what happens when you do this stuff late. I've been up since 3 a.m. I think it's a pretty good system. I think the National Weather Service is definitely starting to incorporate more of that data. You have to watch out. You have to have a little bit of data control in some of the data that you're gaining. But I think that it's a good step forward to get a better idea of a microscale and mesoscale features, especially in severe weather events. Thank you on the promotion. Yeah, it's pretty cool. A lot of you might not know this, and I think this is really good for young meteorologists out there, is that one of the things I decided to do with my career is kind of split and have two careers. Especially when I was younger, I wasn't sure what was going to happen with meteorology. I wasn't sure that this was going to take off. So I had an opportunity via my father. Okay, my father introduced me, and they needed someone who understood lead AP, which is basically like environmental work and stuff. And I've been working with a great company called Pritchard Industries in New York City. Now they're all over the country. They do cleaning. A lot of cleaning, like office cleaning and whatnot, and it's been great, and I really enjoy it. So they give me a lot of leeway to do what I do here, and I help them a great deal also all over the country. So that's a lot of fun as well. So thank you. And with that, I think we are kind of going to close it up for tonight. Let me go right here. So I hope I answered your questions in terms of climate. We'll, if you have any more questions, definitely send them in. I'll answer them next week. But I think that I hope I gave you guys a pretty good idea of what you're seeing on the news versus what's actually in the reports. So that way you can be better prepared for what's actually going on out there. So thank you again for joining, and I will see you next week at the same time, same place. Have a wonderful night, and as always, stay safe out there.